Welcome back. Well, 2019 has been a roller coaster for political parties. A lot has happened since the May elections. Political analyst Ivor Sarkinski joins us now to discuss the highlights of 2019. Ivor, thanks for joining us this morning. I might say that one may even forget that we even had a May election this year because so much has happened in such a short space of time. But let's go through the elections, a very big turning point, a significant time in South Africa's calendar.
Yes, a major election, and all the political parties are, in a sense, licking their wounds, except for maybe the EFF. But the most significant thing that came out of the election is a noticeable decline in public trust in our political parties and our political system. And there are two indicators of that. 9 million South Africans eligible to vote chose not to register to vote, and the turnout at the election declined by around 7%. And that's telling you that people are losing faith in the ability of the political system to respond to their needs. And maybe that's the big story that comes out of the election this year.
I mean, we're talking about the elections, and then we went into how is it that political parties can pick themselves possibly from the elections and just have service delivery and have the action and the implementation out the forefront. But unfortunately for the likes of the Democratic Alliance, it was more involved with internal issues, which then obviously imploded and saw the resignation of Joburg Mayor Herman Mashaba, as well as DA leader Mmusi Maimane.
Well, the turbulence in the DA has been going on for some time, so there were no real surprises in all of that followed the election. And in terms of the decline in support and the turnaround from a long-term trend of increasing support, heads were going to roll. And that happened, and the DA deserves some credit for trying to correct, reorient and move on from that loss. The ANC also lost around 3%, but that's regarded as a victory, not a defeat. And that's problematic because they also lost votes. And Cyril Ramaphosa did well in holding the ANC's ground, but they did lose support, and there hasn't been the same introspection and the same action in terms of what comes out of findings in terms of cleaning up the ANC. And all of that's connected to the internal wrangling inside the ANC itself. Very difficult for Ramaphosa to move.
Well, absolutely. That very difficult wrangling is also manifesting itself in the sense of inquiries, and we've seen a lot of inquiries. One such state capture inquiry that's been top of mind, PIC inquiry. We've had a lot of inquiries as a result of some of those political navigations and wranglings that are happening, and also just looking at how is it that money and the management of the country came at the expense of people trying to gain control of some factions.
Well, and enrich themselves brutally and bluntly at the expense of the country. So that's all part of it. And as the information becomes public from the commissions, action is starting to happen in terms of the NPA, and the prosecutorial process is starting to move, and that's going to result in pushback inside the ANC intensifying. So on the one hand, it's a victory. On the other hand, it's going to result in a reaction, and that reaction is further going to slow down the kinds of things that need to be done to open the economy up, to drive growth, and to make the country competitive again. Everything's going to get gummed down in the politics of the internal fighting now, and it's going to intensify.
Well, of course, I mean, the politics being fought right now, one may say that somebody who's trying to keep himself away from the ramifications of the political chess game that he was playing while still in power is one such former President Jacob Zuma, which we've seen quite extensively how the unraveling, one would literally call it 2019, the year of the unraveling for the former head of state.
Yes, he didn't have a particularly good year, and it showed when he appeared in front of the Zondo Commission. He had very little to say, was cagey, and then shortly thereafter this alleged poisoning, which resulted in an overseas medical visit because the South African medical fraternity appeared not to be competent to deal with such cases. And then recently looking as healthy as anything in the media. So he's going to start to feel the pressure as the information comes out and has his culpability in enabling so many of these corruption events will become apparent.
Well, of course, I mean, over the 700 charges, leveled up against him, and he's been going in and out of court. And one thing that's been quite interesting to note is that whilst he was at the helm of power, we had massive support coming in, particularly when he was attending these court cases. But now it would appear as though the support may not necessarily be as where it was before. And it says something about our psyche as well as a state.
Well, there's always supporters' fatigue. People get tired of doing the same thing again and again and again. So I'm not sure that that's an indication of a decline in his support. It's a decline in people coming to the courts to support him. In certain parts of the country, perhaps he still has significant pockets of support around his homestead, around Nkandla and elsewhere. That remains to be seen. But he's not moving into the backgrounds quietly. And will there be a time when, I mean, for an individual to face over 700 charges, it just seems ridiculous at this particular moment in time. But will there be a time where we say this individual is actually going to be charged, or are we going to be seeing a play out of just court case after court case after court case, and possibly until a never-ending story of just in and out of the courtroom, and wondering who fits the bill at this particular moment in time, because he has to do it in his private capacity? Yes. Well, I don't think finance is a problem. He's got a very comfortable presidential pension, and all that other money is still available in some way or another. So he can afford these court cases, and the Stalingrad approach is going to continue. Everything goes to court, everything's appealed, log roll it, slow it down, prevent anything happening. Ultimately, it will reach the courts, and who knows what the final outcome will be. But what he's done is he set a pattern for how all the other political heads who might appear on other charges that flow out of the Zondo and other commissions on how to deal with this. Yeah. If you can drag it out for 15, 20 years, it means that when you finally get convicted, you may well just be too old to go to jail. And maybe that's what the tactic is.
Let's talk a little bit before we go into the EFF, which held its conference recently, in terms of the DA Federal Chairperson, Helen Zille, who remains in the public eye, and particularly one would imagine that the festive season has brought about more controversy with it. So interesting times ahead for the Democratic Alliance in terms of its positioning on the political scale?
Very much so. They've got to do some careful work here. So the previous leadership was confused, lacked direction, and contributed to the loss of votes through policy unclarity. And it was probably the right thing to get new leadership in. With that new leadership in place, there's a huge responsibility now to clarify things and move forward in order to regain the credibility and trust in the brand of the DA.
And what is that brand, Abu, at this moment in time? Is it the brand that stands for those individuals that went to the Freedom Front Plus, because that's been the rhetoric that maybe they're trying to gain back those votes that they lost as a result of not having a DA identity? Is it to get the black vote? Is it to marginalize the black vote? Where are they at this point?
Well, that's what they have to clarify, is who's their main constituency. They can't appeal to everyone at any time. So what they've got to do is get back to basics in terms of a liberal, progressive party that has a social democratic dimension to it in order to uplift those who are outside of the mainstream. And they've got to position that message in such a way that they can start to attract votes from all racial groups again. And that's the challenge that they have. And that's why these controversies around the federal chair, Helen Zille, is so damaging to these attempts to rebuild the credibility of the party. Because lots of people are on Twitter, and it's not just bots, and it's not just people who are easily offended. These are your potential voters, and you've got to treat them with some respect and with some integrity in terms of not insulting them with condescending speeches, and you've got to build them up and gain their trust by not saying things that are really offensive.
Ava, we definitely got a very interesting 2020 ahead of us where politics are concerned, but we're going to leave it there for this morning.